Duke Ellington, after a long absence from our town, although you've appeared here in one-nighters, we welcome you back for a good week at Izzy's.
Well, thanks very much, Jack. It's a very pleasure to be here. I'm having a ball in your studio. It's wonderful.
The Duke.
I've never seen so much good music under one roof before.
Why did you just say how the Lawrence Welk record's up in there?
Well, Welk plays. I like Welk.
Got a couple of minutes to kick around?
Well, sure. Is it going to be as pleasurable as it has been up until now?
I'm not going to spoil it if that's what you mean right now. But in the early days, I know that you started making your first records around about 1925. Do you recall those days?
1925. I was 3 years old. I wasn't old enough to really join the band, you know.
If that's the case, you've got a pretty good embalmer working for you tonight.
Sonny Greer was the leader then.
Incidentally, before we launch into this little memory session, why don't you plug some of the great and lasting musicians that you have with your troupe here in town? I'm amazed, and pleasurably so, about how many of the originals are still with the group.
Well, it all depends when where original starts.
That's true.
Now, in 1927, Harry Connick came. He's still there. Johnny Hodges in 1928. Cootie Williams, 1929. Lawrence Brown in 1932. Billy Strayhorn, 1939. Ray Nance, 1940. Jimmy Hamilton, 1942. Cat Anderson, 1944. Russell Procope, 1945. And then we get into the new members, like Paul Gonsalves. He's only been there 12 years.
Mr. Newport, yeah. Wonderful.
Sam Woodyard, he's only been there 8 years. It's ridiculous, you know.
Just a child.
Yeah.
The date, November the 29th, 1926.
That's Billy Strayhorn's birthday.
Is it really?
No, it's not. What is it? Yeah, November the 29th. Yes, of course it is.
Do you recall the tune, though? The East St. Louis Toodaloo?
St. Louis Toodaloo? Yeah.
Is that the way you pronounce it?
Well, what actually happened, we started out calling it the Toodaloo, and of course the printer obviously made a mistake and put another O in it or something. I never spelled it for him, actually. And Toodaloo, is a broken walk. And it was supposed to be, in those days, now we do the same thing. Practically everything we wrote was supposed to be a picture of something, or it represented a character or something. And this is the thing that we were walking up Broadway one night after playing a Kentucky club, and we were talking about it. This is an old man after a hard day's work in the field, he and his broken walk coming up the road, but, he's strong, in spite of being so tired, because he's headed for that, to get his feet under the table and get that hot dinner that's waiting for him. And that's the East St. Louis Toodaloo, actually, but since it was misspelled, we've been compromising it, and we call it Toodaloo, Toodaloo, everything,
Duke, at this time we want to hit some of these major compositions of yours, as we intend to do in this little period that we have with you tonight. 1927, The Creole Love Call. An exact date? All right, for those that like to hear these things, October the 26th of 27. Your memories of this song?
Creole Love Call? Well, we had to do something to employ Adelaide Hall. And, of course, she wasn't a regular member of the group, and...
Was she not a great Broadway performer at this time, am I wrong?
At that time, no, she wasn't a real great Broadway performer at that time. She was coming up. She actually left. When was that?
27, yeah.
1927? Yeah, she went to Europe with a show I wrote called Chocolate Kitties, and she came back, and then she was a star. She went over, and Josephine Baker went over in the same show. She was the end chorus girl in that show. And I had just arrived in New York when I wrote this thing, and the guy came up to me one day. He says, "Man, we got to write a show tonight." I said, "What?" I always hear people take 2 years to write a show, so we wrote the show that night. The show rehearsed for 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. They got on a ship and went to Germany, stayed at the Winter Garden in Berlin for 2 years. And Adelaide Hall came back a star, and Josephine Baker stayed in Paris. A scintillating light.
This is a very wonderful and almost an eerie sounding record, something you never hear anymore because there's no spoken word. What do you call this, an obligato or something she's singing?
Well, Jack, this is the thing that we do. One of the things we do is I always say that we are primitive artists. We only employ the materials at hand. And when someone comes in, just like when Kay Davis came in, she was a soprano, so we employed her in her natural character. And anytime a musician comes to the band, we never go looking for anybody, really. If we need a musician and somebody's available, we let them play a couple of nights. And if we like them, we say, well, why don't you stay around and see whether you like us or not? And this is very important, whether they like us or not, because if they don't, then we can't use them as a thing in the band, as a device. And the band is an accumulation of personalities, tonal devices, and as a result of a certain musician applied to a certain instrument, you get a definite tonal character.
In 1928 came the Mooch. In 1930, there was a picture, if I remember right, called Check and Double Check. Do you recall it?
Yeah, I remember that. We were really zooming up then, the stock market had a crash,
But radio was big, and so were Amos and Andy.
Well, we were very, very fortunate because we were on Columbia Broadcasting System, and at that particular period, all the other bands in the country were trying to imitate Paul Whiteman, and naturally they were souped up with a lot of grandiose fanfares and all that sort of thing. And but we had a very, very plaintive sort of style, and out of contrast alone, I mean, we stuck out, and caught on.
Were you not referred to at this time, occasionally on record label, as the Jungle Band?
Well, yeah, that came about because we were recording for several labels at the time. And
what were some of those pseudonyms that you used at that time? Can you recall some? This is a panic. If Duke can remember some of them, I can't remember them all. The Washingtonians?
Well, Duke Ellington worked for, I think he was signed for, Duke Ellington and his orchestra was signed with Victor, I believe.
Yeah.
And on Brunswick, I think on Columbia we were the Washingtonians. On Brunswick we were, on Brunswick we were the Jungle Band, I think. That was Vocalion. Vocalion was the Jungle Band. And there was something, and OK, we had over a dozen names. We had Sonny Gray and his Memphis Men, Joe Turner and his Memphis Men. And we recorded all over the lot, and just used a different name and used different arrangements, and so forth and so on, switched them around a little bit, And it was a ball. We'd run all over town, record all the time.
Let's remember this particular record on Victor, Three Little Words, and this is probably your first meeting with some fellows that I believe at this time, in 1930, they would have been singing with Gus Arnheim and his band at the Coconut Grove. Harry Barris, Bing Crosby, and, who was that again? Harry Barris, Bing Crosby. Oh, who's the third one?
And the other one?
Rinker, Al Rinker.
Al Rinker,
right. Yeah. Do you recall the session, and what can you tell us about Three Little Words?
Well, you see, before we came to California to do Three Little Words, or to do the picture, Check and Double Check, the guys who wrote the score, I can't think of their names right now, wrote Three Little Words for Sonny to sing, because he was the singing drummer in those days. And we got to Hollywood, and he got mic fright, light fright, Hollywood fright, and all sorts of fright. He says, man, I can't sing. I'm not a singer. I'm a drummer, and he's just scared to death. So we says, well, I'll tell you what let's do. Let's go over and get Bing. So we went over to the Coconut Grove and got Bing, and he came over, and he made the track. And the next day, the director heard the record and the track, and he says, this guy can't sing a note by himself. He says, go get the three of them. So then we went back and got the three guys and brought them back over there, And they made the track. The Rhythm Boys made the track, and they photographed it as our three trumpet players singing.
One of your most lasting and great tunes is still around. Oh, heaven knows how many times it's been recorded. Mood Indigo.
Oh, Mood Indigo. Well, now, let me see. When we made Black and Tan Fantasy, it was either, I forget which it was, whether it was new electrical recording or it was before electrical recording. But in using the plunger in the trumpet and the trombone in that duet, or it was a trio at that time, I think, two trumpets and a trombone, we always got a mic sound. It was electrical recording, that's right. We got a mic sound, and they hadn't conquered this, yet, and so it messed up a lot of masters, with it, because every time they'd get the mic sound, they'd throw it out and have to make it again. Instead, they're all night long making the thing. So it was down in Camden, incidentally. We were playing down in Philadelphia that week at the, what's the name of the theater? On South Street. I should never forget it. So we had a little six-piece date in 1930 at down at OK. So we went down, and that night while I was waiting for my mother to cook dinner, I said, yeah, I need another number. I better scratch out something while I'm waiting. So I did the orchestration of Mood Indigo, six-piece orchestration, 15 minutes. And we got down, and the aim, of course, was to employ these instruments in such a way, at such a distance, that the mic tone would set itself in definite pitch so that it wouldn't spoil the record. And it, lucky again, it happened.
Duke, as a chartered member of ASCAP, as I assume most of your music is licensed, it must give you a great deal of satisfaction, not only as a musician, but as a composer, to still be able to perform and indeed promote this music that you've composed down through the years.
Well, oh yes, I have lots of fun doing that sort of thing.
We won't talk about royalties and what they mean to you, but I'm sure they mean a heck of a lot.
Before you go any further now, speaking of royalties, I want you and all of your lovely audience to know that I have no monetary interests. I live in the realm of art.
Moving on with the career of Duke Ellington here, we'd like to say you had a thing for Bing Crosby. This guy pops up again. February the 11th of 1932. He must have been launched by this time.
Oh, yes, he was immediately launched. I always did think that somebody heard that track and says, look, this is what they turned down over at RKO and rushed it over to Paramount real quick.
This is an unusual thing.
Right, immediately after that, he became Mr. Big and never turned back. Do
you recall this particular recording session, by the way?
Which one? The one with the
St. Louis Blues, yes, sir.
Sure, 3 o'clock in the morning.
No.
Yeah, I think he was playing the Brooklyn Paramount and we were playing the New York Paramount, or vice versa. I forget which.
What brought it about?
The date was up at 1776 Broadway, the Brunswick Building, 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was just one of those things, a good combination.
1933, this wasn't exactly a bad year for you either. Sophisticated Lady, and there is a great tune that has been recorded, again, by so many people.
Sophisticated Lady, yes, we were playing, where were we playing? Playing in Chicago. And, I can't remember where we were. We were playing in Chicago. In between the shows, in a theater, I used to go up in a room that I think it was the pit orchestra leader's room, and he had a piano, and I was up there. I was writing something.
Yeah.
And I says, I have to write a thing now to sort of capture a real sophisticated lady, one who has traveled and learned. And I took as an example some friends of mine whom I knew at that time who were school teachers in Washington. These kids were very, very sophisticated. They used to fly off to their weekends around the country and summer in Europe. And I thought that was a real example of sophisticated lady.
Like Mood Indigo, though, which had lyrics subsequently in later years, this one, how long was it after you composed it as an instrumental and probably recorded it as an instrumental before they added lyrics to it?
Oh, I don't know, about a year or so
that
afterwards.
Much?
Yeah, at least that much, yeah. Because we went to Europe in 1933, and the orchestrations came out while we were over there, and I can remember the bands playing it over there. Oh, yeah, and then Mike Parrish did a lyric. And the following year, yes. And but of course he didn't use the same story,
No. Mitchell Parrish, of course, who added the lyrics to tunes like "A Stairway to the Stars" and "Stardust" and so many things. Yes, Mood Indigo too. Numbers that were originally in context.
His name is on Mood Indigo, though, is it?
I'm not sure. We must check the label on that sometime.
Very funny about the Mood Indigo bit.
What's funny about
I saw Mike in Paris a couple of years ago. And he had just signed his renewals with Mills,
Mm-hmm.
And he got a nice fat chunk of money, And so he's sitting there, he's smoking his cigarette, and he's drinking his champagne. And, I'm a rat at heart, And I said, so the guy's very happy about the deal he made. He got this money. And I says, what did you do about Mood Indigo? Man, he hit the scene. He's, damn, I forgot that. Because he doesn't get anything from Mood Indigo.
Why? Well, no. Listen, no. I'm outside the story here. Did he indeed write the lyrics to Mood Indigo or not?
He wrote the lyrics, yeah, but
why does he not accrue from the royalties?
At that time, he was signed with the company with Mills Music, and so they just bought him outright, and he was on a regular stipend, on a salary, and that's it. These things happen. I wrote a couple of things and sold them outright too, real early.
This could have happened in the 30s. Those were tough years.
This is before the 30s when I sold it. I didn't sell anything in the 30s.
Glad to hear it. Duke, around about this time, Hollywood began to notice you. I believe, well, we just mentioned you'd appeared in a picture or so before this, but here we come up to, what in the devil are you ever doing? Dumped into, I can remember this, Murder at the Vanities for Paramount.
Oh, yes, that was a nice picture.
With Carl Brisson, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and, some of my favorite writers were in there. Arthur Johnston wrote the music.
Sam Coslow, probably.
Yes, Sam Coslow. Wonderful lyricist.
If I recall correctly, the tunes were the Ebony Rhapsody, Cocktails for Two, and Live and Love Tonight, or Live and Love Tonight. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, you're so hip.
No, I just have a memory for these sort of things.
Let us say then you're booted.
There's only a few of us left. Let's stick together on this right now. Cocktails for Two. Now, this is a tune that has just been one of the greatest all-time favorites of everybody, Cocktails for Two. And you recorded it as well as Carl Brisson.
I remember we were the first to play it.
Paramount Pictures used you pretty well that year, too. There was a girl that everybody did wrong. She Done 'Em Wrong, Come Up and See Me Sometime, I'm No Angel, Mae West. And there was a picture called, I think the picture was called, was it?
That picture was...
Wasn't it I'm No Angel?
No.
No, not He Done Me Wrong.
No, wait a minute, you're getting me confused. Belle of the 90s.
Belle of the 90s, yes, and you had a great deal of exposure in this picture.
1934.
Right. Probably filmed, I believe, within a month or two of your previous motion picture.
Well, I did both of them out at the same time. Stayed right there on the same lot.
Do you recall your big song in this one?
What did we do in that? I don't know. I don't remember what we did in there. I know there was a thing... There's a gorgeous tune in there. What was that?
I like to think it was My Old Flame.
My Old Flame.
Yes.
Yeah, that was it.
Can you folks picture it? Duke Ellington playing with Mae West singing?
Crazy.
"1934 was a good year for you with Solitude, too.
Oh, yes. That came out in 35, I think. It was written in 34. It came out in 35, yeah. Solitude. Yeah, I wrote that in 20 minutes, standing up.
You're kidding.
Yeah, that's another one of those things. Somebody was we were in Chicago in the Victor studio, and someone else was late getting out of the recording studio, and I needed a fourth number. So I was leaning up against one of those glass office enclosures, and I wrote it out, what orchestration there was of it.
20 minutes to write a song. I never talk money with people that we interview over the years here in the program. What does that 20 minutes mean to you per year? Would you mind telling me, or is that a big secret now, as far as royalties?
Jack, I really haven't the slightest idea.
It's healthy.
I've told you in one way, and I'll tell you, they never let me look at these things. They don't want me to lose my drive, They don't want to stunt my talent.
I have two favorite Ellington compositions. This is one of them, in a sentimental mood, and there is a beautiful melody.
That was written very spontaneously. One playing, just like that. And the occasion, I was in Durham, South Carolina, and after this dance, we went up to the North Carolina Mutual building, an insurance building. Some friends of mine were the executives up there, and we had a party, a lot of ladies and gentlemen, and we were having a bit of sipping, and it was a rather gay party, with the exception of two girls and one fellow. And it seems that they were all friends of mine. One girl who'd been engaged to this young man for a long time, and suddenly her best friend was now, going to take her away from her. And so I had the two chicks, one on each side of me, and I says, now just listen to this. I'm going to, listen to this and get there. You girls are too good of friends to let anything like this come between you. And this is what I played for them, and I played it, and I remembered it, and then I put it down.
The lyric came how long again here after the song?
I don't remember when it was, a year, possibly later.
Strange. There's some of the vocalists that haven't been mentioned up to this time. There was we mentioned it earlier, Sonny Greer. We have been singing a few numbers on early Victors here. They're rather wonderfully sad efforts, but they're part of the time. In fact, I seem to think I have Cootie Williams and Sonny Greer teaming up and doing a duet on something. It escapes me right now. But speaking of the singers that do...
Singing?
Yes.
Ring them bells.
You're right. But what I'd like to bring in here is some of the female vocalists, such as Ivy Anderson. Where did you discover her?
Well, we were working, we had a contract for Paramount Theaters. I think it was 18 weeks. And we were going to open these 18 weeks. We had just done 8 weeks in New York, and we were going to open the new 18-week contract in Chicago. And we heard about her, and we put her on to play the stage shows with us. And she became a part of the organization and stayed.
What year did she join you?
1931, February the 13th, Friday.
How do you remember that so well? Honestly now.
No, because
Amazing.
that is our first time to play a theater in Chicago, and we broke the house record of the Oriental Theater, and we played the town. We played 2 weeks there, and we played 1 week, I think, at the Regal, 1 week at the Uptown, and then we came back to the Oriental again on March the 31st, March the 13th, Friday, and broke it again. And so it's easy to remember.
I can recall her records like Shoe Shine Boy, and I can recall, strange enough, folks, Ivy Anderson, a very fine singer, the late Ivy Anderson, appeared in a picture called, here, I've got to reach for this one, A Day at the Races, in which he sang All God's Children Got Rhythm. And although Duke Ellington and his orchestra never appeared on the label, there was an old label called Variety Records, in which the Ellington Band appeared, surely enough, behind the name once Ivy Anderson got top billing on the record.
Well, she was the one who was booked for the picture. And we happened to be playing there at the Cotton Club in Culver City, and Irving Mills told him, well, why don't you have the band to come over and play, because, you know, they'll give it the real feeling, you know, and we did.
And yet another in the story of Ellington on our NW station tonight. This one is I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart, and incidentally, they're still playing this one right here in Vancouver. You drop over and see it at Izzy's and enjoy it. The soloist originally, I think, would have been Johnny Hodges.
Johnny Hodges, right?
What was the inspiration behind this song? That's rather a trite question. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. What gives you a title like I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart? Why? Why that than anything else?
Well, the tune was written, originally, the tune was written in Memphis, Tennessee, in a little hotel owned by an old friend of mine. I forgot his name. Can't think of his name at the moment. So the tune was written originally as a counter... No, what am I? I'm ahead of my story. The tune was written in Memphis, Tennessee, and... I had a certain amount of inspiration, you know.
Anybody we know?
And, well, you know, I'm seldom
Anybody
alone.
you know?
I'm seldom alone. You know.
All right.
I'm extremely partial to extremely pretty people.
Good.
So we did the song and played it, and we came up back to New York, and I think we played the Apollo. No, that wasn't that. Oh, no, we decided to put it into the show, the Cotton Club show. The show had moved down, you know, the Cotton Club had moved down on Broadway then. They were no longer up in Harlem. And I wrote the show with Henry Nemo, you know.
Who wrote Don't Take Your Love From Me, the fellow, yeah.
That's right. He and I wrote the show. And he liked this melody, so he wrote this lyric to it, you know, and for the show. And out of all the numbers we wrote, you know, you write like around about 20 numbers, this is the only one that was thrown out of the show. And in its place, they put a thing called, what was it, you know, what was it, it's Springtime in Honolulu.
Oh, boy, yeah, well, all right.
And, but this is the tune that came out, got to be the big hit. I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart.
I mentioned a little earlier that the first recording that I really dug the Duke on was in a sentimental mood back in 1935. In 1938, in September that year, when I was a teenager collecting records, and this was actually, I must confess, my first introduction to Ellington. I went into an old record store here in Vancouver called Murray's Record Bar, and like every teenager would be in the 1930s, I was addicted to that which we call the hit parade, which wasn't a bad hit parade back at that time. And there was a musical monstrosity called the Lambeth Walk, and I remember this was... Truly, I remember this was a second-hand record store, and I was all choked up about the fact that I was able to buy the Lambeth Walk. Granted, it was by Duke Ellington, and I got it for a 10-cent piece. And in around about 10 days after buying it, I turned it over and found a prelude to a kiss on the other side, and that firmly cemented my adoration, if that's the word, for the music of Duke Ellington. This is a gorgeous hunk of music, and always has been.
I should love to have been here to welcome you.
To the club.
Yes, definitely.
I was late climbing on board, but I found the others to, you know, fill back, as you can probably see.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Prelude to a Kiss, yeah. Irving Gordon did the lyric to that. That was the same year, 1938.
Another one of these delay efforts written. By the way, did you write this originally as Prelude to a Kiss, and then they called it exactly the same thing, or were these...
No, that was a tune. That was just a tune that was written without a title. Okay. And Irving came up with it. He'd just come, not Irving, what did I say?
It's late in the morning. Irving Gordon?
Irving Gordon, yeah, he wrote the lyric. One of the greatest lyrics I've ever... It's a wonderful lyric, I think. Yeah.
Then there was things like Boy Meets Horn and Concerto for Cootie. Concerto for Cootie, you folks know it under another title, and so do you.
Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me.
And Herb Jeffrey sang with the band around about this time, too. Tunes like My Greatest Mistake and so many others. Also in 1940, Take the A-Train, December of that year. I think Billy Strayhorn had something to do with this one. And while the Duke lights a cigarette, and perhaps I can get one at exactly the same time, there's a... May I? You want to grab me one? Well, okay, while we...
You think Billy Strayhorn had something to do with what?
Take the A-Train.
Take the A-Train? Oh, Billy Strayhorn wrote it. Yes, Billy Strayhorn. That was the big number, 1941 in California.
Here's something that should be asked. During this period we've passed, from the 20s into the 1930s, what did you use as a signature?
East St. Louis Tolo.
Represented.
And then along came the ASCAP BMI war. And
You remember it well.
And
Jeannie with the light brown hair, yeah?
Yeah, and I couldn't play my own music on the air, so I had these other people who didn't belong to ASCAP to writing. I had Tiso writing, my son writing, I had and Strayhorn writing, and that was the foundation of our music firm, because it all went in there. And the firm of Tempo Music at that time didn't belong to ASCAP. It didn't belong to BMI. Didn't belong to anything. It was just an independent firm. And then after the war was over, then they joined ASCAP.
I wonder how many folks remember this war between the broadcasters of North America and ASCAP, and then subsequently the radio stations formed a unit of their own, which they called BMI, Broadcast Music Incorporated. But for several years, or pretty close to a year or more, I know this for a fact, that in all over America you heard nothing but music in the public domain. That meant things that were composed by Stephen Foster, and BMI had a few things going at the time, like Frenesy and Down by the River, and I forget the rest of the music. Anyway, 1941, I Got It Bad and That Ain't Good, and this still features Ivy Anderson.
Yeah, that was written in Salt Lake City.
Was this not about the time that Ivy cut out from the band? Am I wrong?
Well, she left the following year. It was written for the show, Jump for Joy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Herb Jeffries did, I think, the title number, did he not? Jump for Joy?
Yeah, he did.
And Just Sitting and Rockin', wasn't that around about the same time?
Yeah, that was around about the same time, and... what is now Just Squeeze Me, But Please Don't Tease Me was in the show, but it was called Subtle Slough.
Would you mind tracing the last years of Ivy Anderson here? Because this, I feel, is a showpiece and always has been and will always be associated with Ivy Anderson.
Well, yeah, that was one of her that was just about, I think, possibly her biggest number.
What year did she pass on?
I think it was 1947, 8, something like that.
And in the in-between years for her?
Well, after she left us, you mean?
Yes.
Well, she worked mostly in up and down the coast, from Vancouver to San Diego, and did very well, particularly in the state of California.
And there were other numbers here, numbers that I remember very well. Most record collectors of this era will. Moon Mist, oh, that rain ants on this one. Sea Jam Blues, which has been recorded by every group, and recently, of course, by Louis and the Duke. And in 1942, there was a number called Sentimental Lady that ended up with another title that you and I know better, too.
Sentimental Lady wound up as I Didn't Know About You.
Glad you supplied that, because I couldn't remember it offhand.
Bob Russell lyric. Yeah.
Any inspiration behind writing that song?
No, it was in 6 flats, that's all I remember.
You moved 6 times. Well, let's move up into 1944, December the 1st. Another of your compositions. Oh, Duke, you've written so many. Doesn't it make your head spin to try and remember them yourself? Numbers like I'm Beginning to See the Light. How many people have recorded this one?
Gee, I don't know.
You bet you don't.
It's a pretty big one, yeah.
Was it a big seller for you at the time?
Oh, yeah, it was very big. It was almost as big as Don't Get Around Much Anymore.
Tonight, I Shall Sleep.
Tonight I Shall Sleep with a Smile on My Face. It was a tremendous inspiration for that number.
Was it?
Yeah. Beautiful inspiration.
Another fine fellow. As a matter of fact, a guy that I had the privilege of booking here in Vancouver some years ago, lost money with him, but I still love him. His name is Al Hibbler, and where did you find Al?
Oh, Hibbler came in one night when we were playing the Hurricane in New York, I think 1943. And Mary Lou Williams brought him in and says, you got to hear this boy. He sings, you know. And I said, well, turn him around, you know, let him roll. And he sang, and so we put him on the payroll, and he stayed there for a while.
And Duke, in the 1950s, of course, came your stay with, 1940s rather, the late 40s, the stay with Music Craft Records, which unfortunately went defunct some years later, but you recorded a lot of things like Tulips and Turnips and Blue Skies, and you can remember a raft of recordings. Anything that you would say that would sustain from that particular era?
Well, there's a lot of good. I was completely satisfied with everything we did at Music Craft.
Except perhaps the surfaces on the records, because of the shellac shortage at this time. They weren't the best.
Yeah, well, you know what happened with them, don't you? No, this is a wonderful thing for me. They were wonderful people to deal with. Everybody was wonderful and had tremendous artistic respect. I got Bob Stevens, who was a master recorder, as to sit in the date in the monitor room with the engineer to make sure everything was just as we wanted it on every date. And I was very pleased with everything that went into Music Craft, and I had the world's greatest contract. I'll never have a contract like that one again. I had a contract something like they had to guarantee me $100,000 a year in royalties, and if I failed to earn $100,000 in royalties, they had to pay a penalty of $50,000.
No wonder the company went broke paying off Duke Ellington. This is obvious. Duke, what comments would you like to make about your transcription work at that time? You worked for Standard Transcriptions, and there's a thing that you recorded in 1933, The Shade of the Old Apple Tree, but in transcriptions you always get a better shake because you could play longer, and it was a great showcase for the band because of the fidelity.
Yeah, well, it was a great, it was a big record with us when we first made it on Victor. And, I don't know, we made so many things on transcriptions in those days, during the transcription period. We played what we liked to play mainly, you know, and we'd whip up stuff and play things that we never would record. So.
It showed. Duke, and what's come after this? We've wanted to more or less document the earlier part of your career, and now we move into the late 1940s and the 1950s, and Such Sweet Thunder. This part that, you know, the modern crowd are up on. This part they know, you know, and I can remember too.
Yes, well, of course, what we did with Such Sweet Thunder was to do a special thing for the Stratford, Ontario Shakespearean Festival. And we didn't try in any way to parallel Shakespeare's words, of course. Nobody can do that. I mean, that's a life work for 1,000 composers, you know. And but we would take words, you know, like Lady Mac, and do a sort of a caricature of it. And what are some of the other titles? I forget what they were. And we would twist it around, and we'd take quotations like, what was it? Oh, my God. Up and down, something, you know, that thing. And all of those things are wonderful. I can't remember a thing now.
This hour of the morning, I might as well tell you folks that this interview tonight was recorded at, well, right now, for instance, it's 20 to 4. This is the ungodly hour that we keep in this business. Duke, we're going to let you get to bed. It's been a long night. May I thank you very much for giving us a lot of time tonight, perhaps more than we have had from any other artist in the history of this program.
Well, I mean, Jack, after all, everyone doesn't appreciate you as much as I do.
Before you say it, love you madly, but...
Oh, you got me, okay. All right, then all the kids in the band want you to know that we do love you madly.